This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Today's returning guest, Mike Clelland, has written his first work of fiction entitled The Unseen, which draws from real-life experiences and sets them within a fictional world that draws you into it in the same way that a captivating film would. As a matter of fact, I found myself picturing the scenarios in the book in my head as if I were watching a film. As much as I'm not a huge fan of fiction, I was compelled to dive into this particular book because I was familiar with Mike's other nonfiction work having to do with owls and UFO abductions, which I'm a great admirer of, so I felt that I wanted to give it a day in court. I am very pleased that I did so much so that I wanted to have Mike on to talk about it. I start the conversation by asking Mike how autobiographical the book was.
So there's the main character, there's the protagonist, which I say is 100% me, and then people I know who've read the book say, oh, it's not 100% you. And they're like, oh, you're not paying attention if you don't think it's 100% me. So the character, there's the main character in the story. Oh, you might hear some traffic noise out here.
Oh, no problem.
Let me shut the window down here. There we go. And then the main protagonist is a character named John, and there's some stuff in there that is my sister read the book, and she, like, there was a couple things in there where John he's an artist and he kind of laments about his life and nostalgically looks back on his childhood, and he talks about drawing as a little kid. And that was me. Mm-hmm. That was totally me.
I figured
talking about drawing as a child. And when to put the pencil line down, when to put the ink line down, how to erase it. All that stuff was in the story, and I wanted it to be like heavily romanticized, but that was me. And then what I do say is the character John had a full head of hair, and that shows up a little bit in the story. He talks about his hair was messy, or so
yeah.
And but it's the story. If you look at the cover of the book, I did it purposely like a comic book, and the genesis. Thank you. There we go. The genesis of the book was that in 2010, 2011, I wanted to do a graphic novel. I wanted to draw a comic book entirely by myself. And I did a bunch of illustrations. I don't know if you can hear the roosters in the background. If you can, I apologize.
I like it. No.
There's not much I can do about that.
Ambiance.
And so the act of doing the graphic novel, I wanted it like a comic book, and a graphic novel has its own kind of language, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So you're allowed to like go with big ideas and make really bold plot elements, and you're allowed to really go for it in a comic book, where, let's say, literature, you got to be a little more grown up and stuff. So I was definitely like leaning on the side of, oh no, this is a comic book.
Mm-hmm.
But I wrote a good treatment back in 2010, 11, and I did a bunch of sketches and some prep work, I'm not even sure where the story came from in that sense, but I kind of was like, oh, this would be good. And there's a scene in the beginning where the character just wanders in the desert. And I was like, oh, that'd be totally fun to draw. What a great thing to draw.
Yes.
Just desert scenes and some dialogue and his thoughts. Not a lot happens in that. I mean, stuff does certainly happen, but a lot of it is in his mind. Mm-hmm. So he's going through his own internal memories and stuff. Would have been so fun. There's an opening sequence that sort of shows up in what turns out to be like a hospital for the criminally insane. And left it very, very vague at the beginning, but that would have been totally fun to draw too. So that was where my head was at. And then, do you know Christopher Knowles, who does The
Oh, yeah,
Secret Sun?
for sure. Yeah,
I'm
he's been on a
pretty,
few times.
yeah, oh yeah,
Mhm.
he's a good friend of mine. And so back then I called him up and I said, Chris, here's my idea. I want to do this graphic novel. I want to do it all myself. And he was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, don't even think about it. Like you'll make yourself crazy. Don't even think about doing a graphic novel all by yourself because it's too much work. He worked in the comic book industry, and
Yes.
there's like people who do the inking and people who do the writing and people who
Mhm.
do the lettering and people who do the coloring and so I just like my heart just I was so on fire for this project and then I kind of ended up just putting it on a shelf and forgetting about it. And I did 3 other books on the owl and UFO books,
Yes.
which is probably 2 more books than really needed to be written about owls and UFOs.
Oh, no, no, no.
But but I I I was kind of at the end of that, and I was like, well, what do I do now? Like I kind of set myself up. I was writing books, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of like this thing of writing books. So I said, oh, let me look at that old manuscript. I had like a treatment that I kind of started, and I reread the treatment. I was like, you know what? This is gonna. I think this is. I'm intrigued. I think I could make this work. And I started working on it, and I got nowhere. I was so frustrated. It was so frustrated, and then it kind of turned into a pandemic project. All of a sudden the whole world had closed down. So I could
Yes.
literally hermit myself up in the most literal of ways
Mhm.
and just give myself over to this book. And it was so much more exhausting emotional work than I expected it. And you must
Interesting.
sense in the story there was like it's like kind of emotionally
For
wrenching.
sure. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not sure if I was living the story. That's not quite right. But I was certainly swallowed up in the story in the sense that like I felt like there's a town in the book and wow, I feel like I could I knew every pebble on the street in that town,
Mhm.
so that go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I forgot that you had mentioned when you were talking about putting out this book or that it was in the works that you had considered doing a graphic novel of it.
Mhm.
Now after having listened to it, I think it would have made a great, I mean, you still could do it, but if you did it yourself, it probably would just take a long time. It would be a
Oh,
labor of love for sure.
well, the thing with a written book is you can type out a sentence
Yeah.
and you can work on that sentence all afternoon. And then later in the story, something else happens. We're like, wait a minute, now this character knows this, and this character doesn't know this, but
Mhm.
this was all established back here, and then it changes over here. So I got to go back to this part
Yes.
and change it.
Yeah.
Now, if I had drawn that
Yeah.
and I had to redraw something, I would have been totally like clinging, like I'm not going to change my drawing.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me at all to change a sentence or a
Sure.
paragraph or just nick stuff, but to go back and yeah, that would have been. I'm much better equipped at being able to edit heavily constantly. I was constantly taking stuff out, adding stuff back in, cleaning stuff up, and so that would have been really crazy making if I had to do it in a drawing.
Yeah. But it would have been beautiful. I mean, like what you were
I think it
saying.
was but you know what I mean? It feels like a graphic
Oh,
novel, and
yeah.
there's like that was my mantra in a way, was like if I had a default mode, if I had to like decide on putting something in the story, I was like, "Oh, if it's a comic book, if it's
Mhm.
got comic book logic to it, I'm gonna
Yeah.
put it in."
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I was thinking movie when I made the joke about wanting to buy the options for it. Like, I think it would make a great, because there's so much you can do with visuals
Mm.
that you don't need to do with text. You can just show something. You don't need to explain it. It's just there for you to take it in, and you can sort of superimpose your own template on it. But yeah, I think it's a very visual book. There's a lot of things that I know that I was seeing in my head that you were
Oh.
describing that were amazing.
It was a movie in my head. I was a film major in college, so
Oh, wow.
so if you have any questions about Citizen Kane, I'll probably be able to answer them. But beyond that, I didn't get much out of it. But I saw it as a film in my mind, 1,000%. It was a movie in my mind, and I actually put out a blog post. I got to clean it up a little bit, but there's like music in the
Oh,
movie
yeah.
that I have picked out, like there's one scene where like the music's going to start here. There's a
Yes.
and there's the closing credits. There's a song in the closing credits. I'll just say it. It was a song called "Mr. Wilson" by a band called the Jayhawks,
Oh, yeah.
and that was the closing credits. And I bet you for 3 years I listened. I would go on a walk. I live in a beautiful place with a great like park. I'm in the North Cascades with the big trees and all the moss and the ferns and stuff like that. And so I would walk often in the rain and listen to that. I bet you I listened to that song once a day for 3 years,
Wow.
if not more than once a day.
Hmm.
It really informed the mood of the story.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm not familiar with that song, but I will go and
Oh, it's
listen to
easy
it.
to Google. Yeah, it's you'll know right away. People will be like, "Oh, I do get that." Yeah. So, and the lyrics really are. And the song was written long before the movie, or the movie in my mind, let's say.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it was, and I knew the song, but I didn't realize how, until I was like in the throes of writing the book, how appropriate some of the music I was listening to really was for the story.
You said it was a strange odyssey earlier when we were texting today, a strange odyssey on your end to do the book. What do you mean by that? Or maybe I misconstrued what you were saying.
Oh, no, it was a strange
Okay.
odyssey. I had done 3 books that were like formal nonfiction, right? So I had a premise that owls and UFOs were somehow connected. And then I had to make the argument. And I had been blogging about it, and I had been collecting stories. So I had like good stories. So I had like emails that I could quote from. So people I had corresponded with emails. So I had their text.
Mhm.
So I wasn't starting with a blank page.
Yeah.
Like I had a wealth of material. This book, I was totally blank page. Like I could do whatever I want. And that's almost a burden. Like it's like I had to trust myself, I guess is what I'm saying. And that was really hard. And I got really, the book, there was a point when I had written too much to turn back. Like, well,
Mhm.
now I've written this much, I can't like not finish the book. And then, but how do I finish the book when it's so overwhelming? And so there was like 2 years of the pandemic where I was just like, oh God, what did I get myself into? And no one read any of it. No one had seen it. And then finally I sent it out to a few friends. And it wasn't much. It was just a kind of the first third or so. First, well, it was a bit, and I added more later. But anyway, but it was a good chunk of the book.
Mhm.
And they got back to me and they said, "Oh, this has to be a book. This has to be a book." And later, I read some text over the phone to the woman who became my editor, and she started crying when I
Oh,
read this. When they read it, so you just listen to it. There's a scene where I don't want to give any. There's like some serious twists and turns in the
for
plot,
sure.
so I don't want to say
Yes.
too much about. But there's a character named Betty
Mhm.
who lives in the town, and in this little town, the character John just sort of shows up under mysterious. He kind of arrives in this town, and it's a little bit how he got there is a little mysterious, and what this town, there's sort of a power to this town, and and I needed to tell the story of the town. I had an idea where along the Colorado River, there's some barren, empty places in southern Utah. That's the setting of the book, is the southern Colorado. Excuse me, the Colorado River around the southern part of Utah, and I've spent a lot of time there. And so there's parts of the story where I'm describing the landscape, and I'm really like that stuff's in my bones. I've spent a lot of time there, so I really have a like a mystical love of that landscape, and
Mhm.
hopefully that came through a little bit in the
Yeah. Oh,
story.
yeah.
And that was informed. There's an author named Edward Abbey who wrote a lot about that landscape, and I cheated. There's a couple things I stole right from him, but not much. So, and then okay, so the landscape. I just lost my thought. I just trained of thought. I did the thing that I'm so good at, where I start one sentence and kind of finish another one.
You were talking about Betty, the character.
Oh,
Yes.
Betty, thank you. So the character Betty she was the caretaker of the town. So there needed to be someone. He said, "So what's up with this town?" And then Betty could say, "Oh, here's this story about the town."
Mhm.
And that was the only role she was going to play. And during the writing, wow, she took on a much bigger role. And it was like she couldn't. Do you know what ASMR is for the tingles? You can.
I don't.
It's a very obscure little thing. It's like an internet thing where
Oh,
there's like
whispering?
whispering,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
people
yeah.
whisper and you get,
Yes.
and I've had it all my life, but it's when I can have it right in a conversation,
Uh-huh.
and it happens rarely. It happened when I wrote Betty's dialogue. I was
Interesting.
writing her dialogue and I was like, oh my crap, like the hair on the back of my neck is all up and I've got like full body tingles and I was just writing her dialogue, a fictional character,
Hmm.
just writing it. And I was like, oh, she's like, it's just, she turned into a much bigger character. So I read some of the dialogue or a chapter that involved John having a conversation with Betty, and my friend started crying. And then I started crying and I was like, oh God, this is like, now this is a book. And she was like, she was like, this, you cannot kind of do a half-assed job. You cannot just kind of like, I'll just kind of crank this thing out and put it out there. She's like, no, no, no. This is a real book. You have to treat it as a real book. So the editing process, I worked really, really hard to, well, you listen to it.
Mhm.
And when I talk to people who read it, I say, how'd it go reading it? I said, oh, I started it Saturday morning and I finished it Saturday night. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
but that's
page
sort of like
turner.
someone says, oh, I started Friday afternoon, finished it Saturday morning or something like that. I wanted it to feel like a pop paperback story that just races along.
Mhm. Yeah.
And at the same time, I was trying to sneak in, like that's the surface story, right? Like if this was a movie, it would be pretty good, right? There's
Absolutely.
like drama and action and the characters have a lot of dialogue but below that, I was trying to tell a completely hidden story. And I'm suspecting you kind of caught that too.
Yeah, that's one of my questions is what is the story within the story? What would you call the story within the ectoskeleton of the story?
I I I asked a friend of mine, she read the book. She kind of surprised me. She said, I read your book. And I'm like, you did? And she's really smart and she's into these, has her own set of experiences and psychic events and things like that. And I was like, okay, this is a scene in the desert in the beginning.
Mhm.
Where the character just kind of wanders off in the desert. And I said, what'd you think of the opening in the desert? Did that work for you? I was really worried that people were going to think that was too long or drawn out or didn't go anywhere. And she said, it was a ritual as old as time. And I was like, oh, she got it. She got it. She totally got what I was trying to sneak in there.
Mhm.
So I was trying to create a ritual, sort of not a cult ritual, but let's say a shamanic initiation
Mhm.
on the part of John, the main character, and that the myth that was emerging would reflect a there's a hidden multi-layered tapestry of reality that is hidden from almost all of us. Occasionally we get a glimpse into it. John in this story falls into that hidden realm, let's say.
Mhm.
And the first part of the story was the story is in two parts, part one and part two. And I think it's on page 135 or something like that. It actually says, part two. And that's about 1/3 of the way into the story. So what I say is the first half is the internal dialogue of the author, of the narrator, of the protagonist. And you kind of need that to know where his head's at and what's going on and what his struggles are. And then the second half of the book, which is the much bigger chunk of the book, is a detective novel. And that I tried to write it like Raymond Chandler, without all the. It wasn't quite as pulpy, but I tried to have a lot of dialogue and a lot of mystery and a lot of, okay, well, this person knows this thing, but this person says he doesn't, and who knows what, and who knew it when, and what's really going on. And I tried to make it a mystery, and the mystery would have been, you know, what is John's role? So he was basically, the mystery he was trying to solve was himself.
Mhm. Yeah.
So the story within the story would have been the sort of shamanic initiation rites that he was going through metaphorically within the context of the story.
And I believe it was Katie, at least one time in the second part of the story, towards the end, maybe in the last third of the book, actually mentions a ritual that,
I did that twice. It shows up.
yes, yeah,
Actually, it only shows up. Yeah, I did that totally on purpose. I was like,
because my ears
so
pricked
with,
up when she said
I
that.
was like, and the author, the guy who read the book, not the author, the voice actor who read the book,
Uh-huh.
Jay Myers, did a beautiful job.
Yeah,
Did a beautiful job. And more than anything, he captured kind of the internal dialogue of John, the character.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff. I had to, Joshua Cutchin?
Yeah, he's been on
Okay,
here
well,
too.
this is great. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
So I sent a copy of the book to Joshua, and it was still like a review copy, just a digital copy. And
Mm-hmm.
he read it. I didn't expect him to read. He got right back to me, and he said, because he knew nothing about it. There was nothing about it, so he just kind of stepped into it. He didn't have a book cover to look at or anything. So he, as he was reading along, he kind of said, like, you got to let people know that John is going to get somewhere. Like, it's not just going to be him wandering through the desert for a big fat book. You got to know that he's going to get somewhere, which he does eventually. It's only a few chapters in the beginning where he's wandering alone, but so in the back of the Amazon kind of review and on the back of the book, it says, John arrives in a mysterious town. He has an odyssey in the desert and arrives in a mysterious town. So I wanted everyone to know that he's going to get somewhere, and he does get somewhere. But now I did the thing again. What was the question you asked?
That's a great question.
I'm awful this way.
And I when posed what was the question you just asked, I realize how quickly I flush things from my brain and I get absorbed in the answer. So,
but
let's see.
So yes, so
yeah, I think.
With a ritual. When Katie says a ritual, which
yes.
So Katie says the word ritual.
Mm-hmm.
How to say this? My sister read the book. She didn't know anything. She didn't follow. She's not into any of this stuff. She's not into any of this stuff. And she read it just because I wrote it. And she got right back to me like after she finished it. Or actually, you know what she did? She was texting me as she was reading it. Oh, this is happening right now. Oh, this is happening right now. And then she said, oh, we have to go out to dinner. And I don't want to go out to dinner. I want to stay home and finish the book. And then when she finished it, she got right back to me. She said, Mike, I loved the book. I don't understand it. And I was like, well, I'd rather have you love the book than not like it, but understand it. So
yes,
it's meant to be, I wanted the reader to have to work a little bit to try to, and I didn't want to, it was probably only would have been about a page and a half of text. And it would have shown up in the very last chapter 52, like right at the very end. And the character would have been I wrote it all out. He said, this is what happened here, and this is why, and I had this conversation here, but I had it in that alternate realm, and I had it with this person, and I and the other person, we made a plan, and I explained everything. And it didn't work at all. It didn't work at all. It basically ruined the book. And it was the first time I read it in the context of the last chapter, I was like, oh, whoosh, put it in, like read it once, took it out. It didn't work. It worked much better. Near the very end, there's a point where John tells a little parable, and he said, there were these bad men, and they wanted a treasure, and I couldn't let them have it. Do you remember that little segment?
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away. It's 5 sentences, and that's all I gave as far as kind of what happened.
Yeah.
And so I had to, so that little line about a ritual, I wanted to make sure that it was included, and I wanted it in there in the most sinister, threatening way, where the ritual itself in my mind isn't that sinister and threatening, but it was, but the ritual that was, so much is told in metaphor in the story.
Yes.
Yeah. And that I wanted that to be, I actually had it in there twice and I took it out. So it was only in there once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the ending is absolutely perfect as it is. There's not a neat little bow on the end of it. and everything is solved and we know the answers to all the questions that were brought up during the book. We were just talking the other night about, you were saying like that the 3-act formula of a we isn't necessary at all. Perhaps you could say it better than I could.
You're doing great.
We were watching. She is recently enrolled into the Maharishi Institute, which is what kind of broad school would you call it?
I don't know.
Liberal arts.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a university.
Okay. But David Lynch has something to do with the screenwriting program that they have there, which is what Hunter is enrolling in. And so we've been watching a lot of David Lynch films. And as you may or may not know, there's not neat bows at the end.
When people ask me what the book is about, I said it's like Twilight Zone meets X-Files meets Twin Peaks.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. So I think that that's great. I mean, I think Lynch says something to the effect of that's how life is. There's no bookends neatly placed between the beginning of a plot arc and the end of a plot arc. Or then there's not even really plot arcs. There's just slivers of different people's existences and how they cross paths and the context in which they cross paths and the effect that they have on each other and how they play off of each other as far as elements are concerned. I find it all fascinating. I think you did a great job in doing that.
I was a film student in the early 1980s, 81 to 82. I dropped out of film. Oh, that's another thing. So John's like, so I dropped out of art school and after my first year, and that was me. So,
yes, yeah.
That was 100% me. So, but I loved the movies of the 70s, and they remained so. I was just the right age as a teenager to be seeing those movies real time, and then looking back at them now, they're so bold.
Yeah,
and so I kind of wanted the ending to be like a 70s movie.
yes.
Like, have you seen McCabe and Mrs. Miller? It's a Robert Altman movie.
It's been a long time.
Oh, it's. I've had people watch that. I said, you got to watch this movie. And then they'll watch it and they'll get back to me. I'm like, what the hell? Like, that's how it ends? It just ends like that? I'm like, oh yeah, it ends like that. I'm like, that's terrible. And it would never fly. It would never fly ever right now these days. And I was like, I just wanted it to have that ending where it was like, I wanted the audience, the reader to be, I felt the ending was satisfying, but I wanted it to be, I wanted to challenge the reader a little bit and just, this is all I need to say.
Yeah.
And then, and one friend of mine is Brian. He's a super smart guy and he's a really great writer too. So he really loved the book. But he said he was reading along and he was like, oh no, I think I know where this is going. Like he thought there was going to be like some gunfight and then the commandos were going to come in and then he was going to have to fight his way into something. And he was like, I was worried it was going to be the cliche, ending of every cop mystery, where they have to break into the bad guy's lair or something like that. And he said he was so relieved when it didn't end like that. So.
Yeah, I think it was too twisty and turny for me to even begin to think that I knew how it would end. Like it threw too many curveballs. Kept you on your toes, which you said that keeps the reader active in the storytelling. I never foresaw where it was going to go.
And it was funny because I would be in the middle of writing it and I was kind of like, I was trying to write the story, the surface story. I was trying to write the kind of mysterium story underneath it. And at the same time, I was like, I didn't know where I was going a lot of the times. So what I would do is there's a park near here. It's a really pretty park and it's in this part of the world. So the trees are big and it's really, really, really dense forest, but it's just like a 1 mile square by 1 mile square in the neighborhoods here. And the trails are really tightly wound up. And so what I would do is I would get the coffee's great here in the Northwest. So there's this one coffee hut and I'd just get a double latte and I would listen to loud rock and roll and I would walk really fast, just get lost, twisty turny. And I would try to make sense of the story. There were so many points where I was like, oh, do you remember there's a point when he meets a character called the foreman and he kind of goes behind the motel and meets the foreman.
Yeah.
That was like 2 chapters. And I had to like the story was complete madness. And I was like, this point where John meets the foreman, I called him the James Bond villain initially, and I needed a better name than that, so I called him the foreman.
Yeah, it
And
works.
so, but he had to, all the points in the story had to gel
Mhm.
at that moment when he has the conversation,
Yeah.
because he could say, "Oh, I knew this," and then the foreman could say, "You did," and then the foreman could say this, and John could say, "Oh, really?" And so they both of them were kind of like two spies, kind of like, well, feeling each other out. Like, what
Mhm.
are you going to tell me, and what am I going to tell you? And so I could, that point in the story was the notes I had to try like, okay, like there was a lot I had to explain in that story, because it was like, how did he get to the town? What is this woman doing in the town? How did all so I had to it was all put into that chapter. And oh, I mean, I so much of my inspiration came from like my ritual was coffee, loud rock and roll, walking really, really fast. And then I would kind of like, there it is. And I would get my phone out and I would push the voice memo and I say, okay, if John knows that this happened early in the story, but the bad guy doesn't know that this didn't happen, and it does it, and there's a point where I don't even know whether he's a bad guy or not. So I just put that right into the dialogue
Mhm.
of John's inner thoughts. It's like, I don't know whether this guy's good or bad. So it was like this. I painted myself into so many corners and had to like I had to create the logic to so that the reader wouldn't so that at least I had to understand the story
Yeah,
as the author, and there was
exactly.
points in the middle where I did not understand where the story was going. Yeah.
Well, that's good then, and it is an odyssey for you too. It's not you're like a half reader at that point. You're almost dictating uh, from above at the same time as you are trying to make sense of it as it's coming to you, and you're trying to put it in a form where people can get something from it, perhaps. I don't know. You're the
I
middleman.
wanna Yeah, what I wanted, I just basically wrote the book I would wanna read.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So back to potential autobiographical elements,
I
especially.
do want to ask one
Oh,
quick
please do,
question.
please
Oh,
do.
sure, sure.
Did you use the same formula to write? Did you use the same process with the other books?
No. No, I just what the process was with the other books, which, like, happened a little bit. Here's the process with the other books. Have you read The Messengers, the Owl and UFO book?
No,
Okay, it's okay, you
I've
don't
been
have
in school for the past 3 years, so I
okay.
have had my head buried in academia.
Okay, so this is not an academic book, but it is kind of a journalistic book, let's say. So my methodology was I would get stymied and would feel like I was dead-ended in a chapter or something like that. And it's like, oh, this isn't working. This chapter is not working. I don't have anything. It's not coalescing. I need just the right thing to make my point. And then I would go to bed. I would get up the next morning, and then email would arrive, and it would be someone saying, "Well, here's my owl and UFO story," and it was the perfect story
Wow.
to solve the issues in the overall uh, book project.
Mhm.
So my methodology was to open my email inbox, and then the perfect story would often be there waiting for me. At and that happened so much that I just expected it.
Mhm.
And the methodology. So your question was, what was my methodology different? Yeah, it was totally different. Where I I had a couple really powerful synchronicities. I'm happened to be almost beyond synchronicity. It was almost like a lightning bolt from God, but it was which I guess that is a synchronicity. But I but it was a really an internal work to try to write it. So like the struggle, like John is struggling in the story, and I was struggling in the story. There's a point when, like, basically they said, "Oh, Katie doesn't act like this. We're all worried about Katie. Katie, that's not like her." And I wrote it too many times, and I caught myself writing it too many times, and I was like, and then I just had the main character say, like, these guys are lying because they're just telling the same story over and over again. They're trying to deceive me. I don't know what's really going on. So I just put my own doubts right in the story, and that happened a lot where I literally did some things where I wrote the dialogue, and I could have certainly changed it, and I was all about editing, and where I one character says to the main character says to another character, he said, "Oh, well, this happened," and it was like, "Oops." He kind of like the internal dialogue was like, "Oh no, I said it. I shouldn't have said that," and now he knows. And it was like, that happened a lot.
Mhm.
Where I just realized, no, that's good. Let me play off that and write the dialogue around that, so.
Yeah, I like
But
it.
that happened a lot.
It's interesting that your other books were a collaborative process because you had some psychic thread that was kind of going between those books and people sending you information and sending you their stories. And this seems like with this book, the collaboration was maybe with another dimension, so you were communicating with another level. So maybe
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
the frequency is different, so it could be harder to get through. So you had to kind of put yourself in this intensity in order to strengthen that link.
Here, I'll tell a story. Yes. So yes, like that intensity and that there's a point in the middle of the story, roughly about the halfway point in the story. And so Chris, how long did it take you to listen to the whole story through?
I think I got all except 2 hours in basically 2 days. It all has to do with as I said, I work construction. Sometimes I work by myself. Sometimes I work with other people. Sometimes I have a part of a day by myself, part with other people. So I'm kind of, it's kind of dictated by my circumstances. So if I got some time by myself, a couple hours here and there, that's when I'll go and back and listen to the book. So I probably would have gotten through it a lot quicker if I would have had like say a full day working by myself, because I probably would have gone through it all in one day. But as it was, it took me, I think, a couple of days to get up and let's see, I think the whole thing was maybe 12 hours.
Yeah,
Through the first 10 hours of it. And then the last 2 I just did this morning.
Oh, those are good. The last 2
Yes.
hours.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like,
I was looking forward to it. I was hoping.
I'm proud of the last 2 hours of
Yeah,
that
yeah.
book. Yeah,
I was so hoping that I would have time today working by myself that I could do it, and thankfully I did. So
I didn't want to pester you, but I was like hoping you'd read the whole thing too.
Yes.
I didn't want to I know how I can be, but okay. So in the middle of the story, there's a point of the story, and again, I don't want to give too much away because there's a lot of twists and turns and stuff. But 2 main characters, kind of a love interest there. They sit under a swing set, and there's an airplane going over, and there's an owl comes and lands on one end of the swing set, and an owl lands on the other end of the swing set. And this is in kind of a spooky, abandoned elementary school in this kind of ghost town. And so these 2 owls are up there, and this is based on a real event that took place in the Messenger's book. There's a woman, her name is Susan Kornacki, and she had a powerful experience on a hammock between 2 trees. She was lying in a hammock between 2 trees, and there's a build up to this where she was feeling this energy running up and down her spine. I actually asked her, like, are you having would you call it a Kundalini awakening? She knows she's smart. She knows what that meant. She said, no. So, okay, it sounds like a Kundalini awakening, but I trust you. So she had to leave a Easter party, which is wonderful. Easter party is that's a death and rebirth day in the Western calendar. She left an Easter party, came home. She said something's wrong. She told her husband, something's wrong. I got to leave. So she took her car and came home. It was a beautiful spring day in New England. She lays in the hammock. And as soon as she lays down, an owl lands on one tree. The hammock's tied between 2 trees. An owl lands on one tree. And then another owl lands on the other tree. And they start squawking at each other, hooting at each other in full daylight. And she's laying in between them. And she said, I felt energy rushing up and down along my body, rushing between the 2 trees, rushing up, basically along my spine. She said, I recorded this conversation. Her dialogue was so mystical. She said, I was being recalibrated by these owls. And this is someone who had UFO contact events. She worked with John Mack when he was still alive in Boston. And so and then afterwards, her husband comes home and says, how are you feeling? And she says, what do you see? So there's an owl in that tree there on that branch, and there's an owl in that tree there, and they're hooting at each other. She goes, uh-huh. And so after this event, people would call her up and say, can you do, I got this, can you do an energy healing on me? She never put it out. She never said she didn't do energy healing. And she said, okay, I can try. And so she started doing energy healing after that event with the hammocks, with the hammock between the two owls. So that real life event informed this fictional event where there was two owls on a swing set and they were on each end and the people were on the iron chains in the middle, and then somehow magically they get zapped. And they kind of, I used near-death experience literature to kind of inform this section where they went into this kind of magic realm, but it's only told from the first person, so you don't really know what the other person experienced. But there's a beginning of one chapter that was a piece of work to try to purge that out of me. That was real. So I'm making that's one page of dialogue or one page of the book. So it's one page of the book where he really spills it out. And I wrote it at night, and I knew I had to write this. So it was like late at night, and I just like, oh, I got to get this out. And I had a good set of notes. I knew what I wanted to include. And I just purged this thing out and wrote it all out. And then the next morning I got up and I kind of was doing the workaday stuff. We're like, oh, this needs a comma here. Okay, I said this twice. I don't need to say it again. Oh, I can just, this 2 sentences, I can make 1 sentence. And then all of a sudden I was like, what did I do? What did I, like the whole book is now dependent on this one point. It's really like the nexus right in the middle, the fold in the story. And it doesn't make any sense. 2 people had a shared near-death experience under a swing set. That's the stupidest thing ever. Like how, like I have to ask the audience to trust this. And I don't even, it's like, oh, like I just, my whole world dropped. Like I put so much work into this book and I'm like, oh, now it's stupid. No, it doesn't make any sense. So, and as I'm having this thought, I'm at the desk and I'm like, oh my God, and I thought I was going to fall asleep. Like plum, my head was going to hit the keyboard and I was going to pass out. So I laid down and I was out. Like, which I could take naps every once in a while. There's a kind of a nap has a certain feel. This wasn't like that. I was out. And when I woke up, I was like, is it the next morning? Like, did I sleep all night? What happened?
Yeah.
I was out for like an hour or something. So I sit back at the desk and I do something I do normally, but rarely. But I checked Facebook and I had a friend request, which I get a lot, but I never do this. I was like, there was this woman's face there and it's a little teeny icon. And I'm like, oh, there's so many bots and who is this person? Who could it be? And so I said, so I Googled her name. Her name is Scarlett Heinbuch. And she wrote a book on a shared near-death experience, her own personal shared near-death experience. She was this is at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. She met this woman and they got to talking, and the woman says, well, I'm here in town because my son is dying. He's not expected to live. He's dying. And he's in the hospital and his kidneys have shut down and they're basically like, I'm here to see my son die. And she said, I do Reiki. I can give him comfort. Is it okay if I visit him in the hospital and give him comfort and I can give Reiki? And she says, of course, of course. So she goes to the hospital. She doesn't know this guy. He's lying there in the bed. He's got his eyes are taped over. He's got hoses up his nose, and he's got a breathing apparatus in his mouth. And he's got the little hospital cap on. She doesn't know what he looks like. And then she holds his hand and starts going through the ritual of the Reiki process. And then whoop, she's like out of her body. She's in this mystical realm, completely magical with sparkling little dots of universal love that's just swirling in this infinite timeless realm. And she sees this guy, he's floating away. He's going into the light. She takes his hand and pulls him back. And she says, I know you. I've known you. I've known you all my life. I've known you all my past lives. I know you. And then she's back in the hospital bed, or in the hospital, holding this guy's hand. The guy makes a complete recovery, astonishes everyone. And they've been married for 12 years.
Wow.
So that was the person that contacted me in the moment where I was saying, this book is not going to work. I give up. And I tell you what, I never questioned it at all after that. I was like, nope, this is going in. I got every bit of proof I need that this is correct in the story. It's going to work. It's going to be fine. And I just moved on. Where an hour before I was just my heart had sunk so low. So yeah, so that's a really good example but that kind of stuff was happening during the writing of this book.
Which also, speaking of Lynch, that's a very Lynchian way of going about things. Because, you're obviously familiar with Twin Peaks.
Oh yeah.
And are you familiar with how the character Bob came to be involved in the story? Yeah, which is total synchronicity. It's like a total spontaneous occurrence that he decided to incorporate into the storyline, and it completely, had a huge part in everything.
Wasn't it like an extra on the set, just needed to hold something down? He was kind of crouching behind a bed, but no one knew you could see him in the mirror.
Yeah. Well, that's one of them. I think there's another situation where he was accidentally in a shot, like he was looking through the end of a bed or something like that, and he was like, "No. Just Somebody said we need to reshoot this because so and so's in the shot." He's like, "No, let's keep it in there." And then that eventually turned into probably the main antagonist of the whole thing, Bob. And that's he's all about using synchronicities and things that come from the subconscious and things that spontaneously arise in the situation to incorporate in the story making. And I think that's genius. And that's kind of what the same element that happened with you.
Well, it's almost, I've written 2 books with synchronicity right on the cover.
Exactly.
Is part of the thing. So I feel like I got some pretty strong ideas about what a synchronicity is.
No shit.
This wasn't a synchronicity. This was like a slap with this in the face with a 2x4 of destiny. I don't know how else to say it. It was like, it did not feel like a synchronicity.
Yeah.
It was like, no, somebody got on the red phone and said this is let's make this cosmic event take place. And I since have done Scarlett Heinbach. Here's her book. I did the cover. We're good friends now, and I did the cover of her book.
Oh, so, cool.
Wow.
Nice.
I did the illustration. There was 2 hands holding there. So so I don't know. This is I'm thunderstruck and that there's here, let me ask you a question. So did you know this was a UFO story? The Unseen?
I suspected it. Yeah. I try not to, I'm just fresh off of it, so I haven't had a whole lot of time to reflect on it, but I definitely got that vibe. I don't know I'm trying to think of what elements pushed me in that direction, but I felt that vibe there, even if it wasn't outrightly stated.
So I'm doing this work where I have, if anyone anywhere in the world has an experience with a UFO and an owl, I'm about 2 mouse clicks away. You type in UFO owl, I'm the first thing that comes up. I'm the next thing underneath it. I've got a bunch of different websites and blogs and podcasts. And right at the top of every single one, it says, I want to hear your owl story. And so I'm getting them. People have these people in, Cyprus have a owl and UFO experience. They find me and quick. So I'm receiving these stories in a flood that I can't keep up with. It's just like I cannot keep. So that's my full-time job in essence, is answering the emails of people with UFO and owl stories. I can't keep up. So the stories that I'm hearing, right? So if you read books by Bud Hopkins and Dave Jacobs and kind of from a certain sort of era of the UFO contact research, you would think things happen one way. People get taken out of their cars on a lonely road and they get taken on board a flying saucer, or little gray beings enter your bedroom through a vortex in the wall, and then they drag you out into a waiting flying saucer, and then you go through medical exams. That's the mythology that we have in our pop culture. I talk to people all the time. Now, granted, I'm not looking at, I'm self-selecting. People are coming to me for a reason, because it has to do with owls and UFOs. So there's this big, broad spectrum of UFO research and literature, but I'm like the narrowest little sliver within that, the owl mystery. And it's been proved so rich. So the people who are contacting me, I've heard stories a little bit like that, kind of oh, maybe the kind of the being on the table is kind of the what you if you only watched like exploitative UFO documentaries,
Yeah.
that's what you would think it is. Nobody says that. What they say is, I am in the throes of something so strange and so beyond my ability to keep myself in balance. And one of the threads is synchronicity. Just you ask people who've had an owl and UFO experience, got any synchronicities in your life? And they're kind of like, they feel like they can't even begin to answer it because it's such a monumental thing that's part of their life.
Yes.
And the strangeness and this sort of orchestrated events and seemingly orchestrated relationships and how it all feels so important. Like they're like, I'm like there's a sense of they're playing some important role in the destiny of humanity. That's embedded into this thing. So I wanted the story to 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 reflect the accounts that I'm hearing, what real people are telling me. So the character John is going through exactly that. And then there's a few other characters who kind of say as much in the story too. But on the very first page, before the story begins, I write, let me just get to it. This story is fiction, yet the emotions are real. And I tried to fall back on that as far as like, it's totally made up, but it is informed by people's real events. And then if there was a fallback, I wanted the emotions to feel real, even though plot lines and points in the story were sort of comic book ridiculous. I did my very best, let's say, to describe the emotions as real. So, and I also, as a little challenge to myself, I said, I want to write a UFO book where the word UFO is never written.
Mm-hmm.
And I want people to read it and at the end not even know that it was a UFO book.
Go ahead.
And I wasn't like trying to hide it so much, but there's some points in there where he says, oh, there's a spot where he sees an orange dot fly across the sky and talks about how strange it is. So there's a UFO in it, but he never uses the word UFO.
Mm-hmm. I think it is because of people like Josh Cutchin, who you mentioned, who have done so much research in regards to the overlaps of these different experiences, UFO experiences, paranormal experiences, cryptid experiences, and how they have a whole lot of the same elements within them. So I think had I not known you, I would have said, maybe something like that is going on, but I'm not going to try and put a category on it. But knowing the context, you and the other stuff that you've written, I did sense that you were probably leaning towards UFO. But I didn't, again, I tried not to categorize it and I just let the story tell itself to me and not try to, I haven't had a chance to pick it apart yet. So.
Well, we're doing that right now in a way.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
So. And I'm like, nobody knows the book better than me in the sense that I like immersed myself in it. And I bet you, I this is not quite true, but I bet I spent 6 months with a nearly completed manuscript, just going through it and just like scrubbing this and rereading a paragraph and taking out a word. And I really wanted it to race along.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really wanted this story to race along. And I wanted which I didn't, when I did the first read through of it, like the book is kind of, here's all the chapters, needs a little bit of cleaning up, but let me just read through the entire book in one push. And I was like, oh man, this races along. It just surprised me so much. And then I took that as a challenge. Let me make it go even faster. Let me clean up some stuff. Let me take this out. There's a little town and there was kind of it was never really clear, like, how do they get the groceries in the town?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of wrote this whole thing. It probably was 2 pages. Like, okay, they're like nice person down the street and they have a truck and they go to the next town over and everyone meets there. So it's got this nice little community feel.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked great as far as something from like Prairie Home Companion. It was like a really warm thing. And then but it was like, after I wrote it, it was in there for a while and I was like, nope, just out. And I got really good at like trusting that red pen,
mm-hmm.
or I guess it would be the delete button on the keyboard. So, and I scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed. Do you know who Mac Tonys was?
I only know him from you.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was Tony at the barista. That was totally based on Mac Tonys.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I did not know that.
I sent the book. So I shared a lot of emails and phone calls with Mac's mother after he died.
Oh, Wow.
which was really important for me.
Sure.
And so I sent the book to his mother.
Would-
And which is what happened was when I was first, I would ask people like, what'd you think of the book? Because I really was like, I was a mystery to me. The book is very strange in many ways, and it's strange to me, and I wrote it. And I would ask like, I wanted the characters to be really likable. Like I wanted the reader, I didn't want the reader to be like, so many books are like, there's like villains and they're bad and like super bad. And
Yes.
there's like almost this kind of like torture aspect to like
Yeah.
reading stuff sometimes.
Exactly.
And I didn't want any of that. Even the bad guys are pretty great.
Mhm.
Like really likable bad guys. I wanted
Yes.
that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
even the and then I'm not even sure if they're really bad, you know.
Yeah.
So but and everyone said that I was getting this consistent feedback. My sister, who doesn't know anything, but she said, "Oh, I love Tony. I loved Tony, the guy that ran the coffee shop." And I was like, "Oh, that didn't happen by accident. I was imbuing it with that." And Tony, when you get right down to it, doesn't have a very big part.
No.
Yeah.
But he's a crucial part, though. He's the guy he's the initial interface between John and the town, basically.
Mhm.
He accepts him in and basically gives him room to get his bearings as he stumbles into this strange place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to the autobiographical elements, and I'm just curious as to where to draw the line, I guess. Sometimes I've never heard you speak about what John intimates in the story, and Katie also experiences this special testing that they received in school because of their abilities or because of it's not made completely clear. And if it was, then I didn't pick it up. But was there anything like that in your childhood?
Not in my childhood, but
Okay.
I certainly have talked to a lot of people, and I've heard that story. It's pretty common when you talk to people who've had UFO contact experiences or abduction experiences. Boy, they'll tell you like, oh, like I got taken, like the people came to my elementary school and they gave these tests,
Yeah.
and they said, oh, here, now that we've given these tests, let's go meet over, and or they met with their parents, or they took them on so I've heard that story in one form or another many times.
Oh, well, I asked because I know that you've had not only UFO experiences, but you have even questioned whether you may have been abducted at some point. So I was wondering, there's that correlation. Perhaps it went back to you getting tested or something happening in school.
No, that was so I don't have that experience of being tested at school, but
Okay.
I do have so I write at great length about my wonderings about what had happened to me
Mhm.
in my life at certain chapters. And I sure have some. So I feel the term abduction is really loaded, and there's
Sure.
a lot within I have no problem with it, but I've learned that some people do. So I got to be careful using that term. I put it on the cover of the first book, Owl's Synchronicity. The first book is titled The Messengers, and the subtitle is Owl's Synchronicity and the UFO Abductee.
Mhm.
And someone actually said, well, UFOs don't abduct people. Like the aliens abduct people. And it's like, well, I don't even know what aliens mean. Like UFO is kind of like is a trope. It's a symbol. It's like a symbolic phrase. So
Yes.
like that doesn't bother me that I put that on the cover of the book, but it bothered him. I'll tell you that. So, but
But we don't know that either. It could be a UFO that's abducting someone.
it could be. So yeah, you first. The U in UFO is unidentified, so no one knows quite what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'm very much at the point now where there was a book by Dr. John Mack from the late 90s called Passport to the Cosmos, and he compares and contrasts the UFO contact experience or UFO abduction to the rites of the shamanic initiate.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's fascinating. And I read that very early on in my own exploration into what might have happened to me. And I really took that one to heart. And it made me very comfortable taking a few steps back and saying like, okay, here's the picture that's being presented, but not so fast.
Mhm.
And so that like in the story, it doesn't feel like they're interacting with metal spaceships. And in the pop culture, that's what UFOs are.
Mhm.
Mhm.
They're metal spaceships from another planet, and they're hidden in some bunker in in the Southwest, and they're being back engineered, and there's a whole mythology around that that mirrors the mythology of X-Files. But when you talk to people, it sounds like the people who have had the contact experience, it is so mystical. And so, not all the time, but the stories are so mystical. And one of the things that happens to people who have had UFO contact, and even the most above board organization, MUFON, is a very, very Mutual UFO Network, is a very, very conservative organization. I'm not a member of MUFON, but I know some members, and I was like, there's a sheet. There's like when you go to a witness, they give you a form to fill out. Like, can I look at that form? I'm like, sure. So they gave me one of the forms. One of the questions on there, they have really normal questions like, oh, did you see a UFO? What time of day was it when you saw the UFO? Could you draw a picture of it? Was it moving east to west, or, like those kinds of questions. And then in among those, there's like, since your UFO sighting, have you had a change in or heightened psychic experiences, or ESP? And that's what I found is really consistent. Again, I'm not looking at the totality of UFOs. I'm looking for the people who've had UFOs and owl experiences. And I basically, how's your psychic skills? And they kind of, well, I guess I have weird stuff happens, and I have premonitions or dreams that come true, or often, or it's straight up, oh, I live in Sedona and I'm working as a psychic, and that's what I do for a job. So there's that aspect to it too. Or someone's been studying remote viewing and now does remote viewing as a job. So that I try to imbue into the story, where the one character, there's some characters that have psychic abilities, and then the character John is like struggling with what's a psychic event, and what am I manifesting just through my own energy, and so I wanted to make that very blurry so it didn't feel clean and tidy.
Was Katie based on anybody from your life that you care to share?
I'm not going to, I do not care to share that right now.
Okay.
So I'll talk, but we can talk privately after the microphones are off.
Sure.
But, it's a funny story. It's there. Yes. There was just a friend in the neighborhood, basically, but there's no deeper story to that, but I can't say much more than that.
Yeah,
so,
I understand.
So there's nothing mysterious about the friend in the neighborhood, but it was just like, oh, there was, so there's a point when it says, like, oh, my sister used to babysit for me and this other, and she's like 60 years old now. She's the same age as me, but we were little kids, and my sister would babysit. And I told my sister that, the character, she was really, yeah. But there's really nothing to the story so.
Gotcha. What was I going to say? Oh, I found it interesting when I believe it was the pilot that was talking to John about. I'm confusing who was talking to John. Somebody was talking about John about analyzing one of his paintings that he did, I believe, under the influence of peyote. And there were 3 points in it that, oh God, I'm trying to think of the way to word it. But they correlated with 3 points on a map, basically, which seems very similar to something that I've heard you explain about 3 points on a map where something happened at each of these 3 points that was significant to you. Those things are correlated?
I sort of, but what informed it more was a person who, oh God, this is the problem to tell this story, okay, there's a backstory, and then there's the thing that happened, and then there's the way I actually mysteriously met this guy in real life. And so I'm not going to use his name.
Okay.
And there's a documentary called Painting Your Way to the Moon. This fellow, I feel like I just can't use his name without his permission, he was working for JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs. I think I've got this right. I'm probably getting some things incorrectly. And he's a mathematician, and he was interviewed by Whitley Strieber years ago, and they kind of doctored his voice up a little bit. And I think he's come forward a little more with this. But he was an advanced mathematician, and they called him in, and there was a Japanese probe that was in orbit of Earth. And it's very expensive, the fuel to get it to the moon. They wanted it to orbit the moon. And he was called into the office and said, well, haven't you been working on this little thing where if you have a trajectory and you can work off the gravitational pulls of other planets and the rotation of the planets, and there's this like inherent soup of gravity that's swirling around in space. It's very subtle. And do you think you could get this probe that's broken, that doesn't have any fuel, but we can push it? It has just enough fuel to just push it in one direction. Could you get it to the moon? Right? Because the orbit of the moon would attract it. But so he's like, oh, good grief. So he's totally lost. He can't figure it out. He's got it. So what he does is he's an artist, and he said, I'm just going to let go, give myself over to the artistic, creative process, and I'm going to do a painting, and I'm just going to do whatever comes in, and then I'm going to give this to the labs at JPL and say, analyze this painting and give me the data from it. So he does this painting. It's nothing. It's like this swirly, abstract bunch of lines. And he just, okay, this is it. And he gives it the painting, and then they come back because they basically said this satellite is useless. We can't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's got just enough fuel to push it in one direction. So they analyze it and they come up with all this data, and like, well, here it is. You just push it in this direction. And so instead of pointing at the moon, which is logically how you think, you point it totally in the opposite direction. It makes this weird, giant, loopy arc throughout the solar system, working off the gravity of other planets, and then which should come back and then circle around the moon. So he, like, okay, we got nothing to lose. They push it off, and nobody knows. Like, this thing's gone. Like, they can kind of track it, but they don't know where it went. And so, okay, it was a gamble. And then he was driving through Wyoming with his girlfriend at the time, and this is like. And then he got the inspiration. Okay, we're supposed to go from point A to point B, but instead of taking the main road, let's take this side road. Or I think it was his girlfriend at the time wanted to take the side road, and then it was like he had what clearly sounds like a UFO abduction. There was this giant cube floating in above the road, and as he's approaching, it's such some workmen on the road, and then they go under the cube, and he realizes these workmen are tiny little gray beings, and then he panics and drives off, and when they get to the next town, the clocks don't match up. They should have been there earlier, but it's some hours of missing time. And then he finds out later, like he has that dated, like he went under the cube, and he and he found out later that moment under the cube, they got a phone call. Hey, the satellite, it's rotating around the moon. Made it perfectly. It aligned perfectly. Now it's rotating exactly the way it's supposed to rotate. And it arrived at the moon at this time of day in the night on this date. And he looked at his calendar, and that was the date he drove under the weird rectangle.
Wow.
So now fast forward to a couple of years ago, I was living in upstate New York, and my partner at the time, Andrea, we ran this cute, adorable inn, and it was actually a really idyllic life, like this great big old farmhouse, and we were just renters, but we were like, we had this little spiel down, and when people came to the inn, we had a bunch of rooms in this 3-story old 100-year-old farmhouse, and this guy shows up, and this is funny, I've never told this story, but so I got to be careful. He and his girlfriend his girlfriend he told this story. He was like, I don't know how we got to this town. And he says we were supposed to go to Maine. We had this thing, we plugged it in, we were supposed to go to Maine. It took us right to the town here, and it took us right to this hotel. And we had booked at this hotel, but we thought we booked at a hotel in Maine, but we ended up in upstate New York. And we didn't even realize that we were following the sat-nav thing, and we ended up at this hotel, and they had the reservation because we had made the reservation, but we thought it was in New Hampshire, and we're here, and then we get this little thing here and what to do in the town of Saranac Lake, New York. And one of the things was to do a sound healing. It was right on the thing, like you go in a sound healing. My partner Andrea did this sound healing at the living room, this beautiful living room in this old farmhouse with the dark wood and
nice.
Big fireplace, and she would do sound baths for people where they would lay down. And she would ring chimes and gongs, and so this guy and this woman show up, and I'm talking to him, and he says, "Oh, I work as a mathematician," and his girlfriend says, "Oh, he's being modest." And I don't know why I said this. I looked at this guy and I said, you're the guy that went under the big cube in Wyoming. And the look on his face was like, what? How do you, what? Like, and I was just like, and I knew because I had heard the story that he had told. Some reason when he said, I'm a mathematician. I work as a mathematician. And she said, he's being modest. Like, basically, he's a really good mathematician.
Yeah.
And then I said, oh, you're the guy that went under the cube. And and then, wow, he was like, we went to the bar that night, and let me tell you, he had some stories. So,
wow.
So that's a long story to answer.
Jeez.
That was the story that informed, because in the story there, the character known as the foreman says something to the effect of like, oh, we had access to an advanced computer and we ran some calculations just on these points and the dots and the shapes of the swirls and stuff like that. Oh, and that image, I'm giving a lot away here. Are you familiar with Jung's Red Book?
We're now behind the paywall, so that's it. That'll lessen the audience just a little bit. Am I familiar with what?
Carl Jung's book, The Red Book.
I've heard of it, but I've never actually held a copy.
Well, the Red Book is like it's like a illuminated manuscript which should be on in some like ancient castle.
Okay.
You know, and it but there's like a $300 version of it. You can get this big giant like book that seems like a monk made it, which I guess is exactly how it was made. So
sounds amazing.
Carl Jung like basically did all the lettering and all the
crazy.
It's all in German, or Swiss German, and then it's all in and then the and he did all these illustrations, but there's an illustration in there of a bush, and that was the painting that he called The Dream.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what it was based on, was this Carl Jung image. So we're behind the paywall right now. I'm going to show you something here.
Yeah, do it.
So I don't know if we could see. Oh, the paywall they can't see because the paywall is the paywall video.
Yeah, the paywall video.
I made bookmarks, right? So I'm kind of promote. So I self-published the book. So here's the front. So that here I gotta move the little thing here so I can see what I'm doing here. So, so there's the little bookmark, right? That's exactly what it should look like on the front.
Yeah.
Awesome. Here's the back.
Oh,
nice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Gorgeous.
That's the coffee. There's a whole thing that takes place in the coffee shop.
Yes.
I'm giving away like a super spoiler alert. Now I can see myself. I'm all self-aware. So the I don't want to give too much away. That's the latte art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was alluded to in the book.
Mimics the tree.
Mm-hmm.
In the story. And we should probably say not much more than that.
Okay.
But so there's a point when he's like, oh, I got to make he's like, it happens a few times where he's trying to make the tree and it's never quite works out right. And he's trying to make the latte art.
Yes. Yeah.
Finally, at the end of the story, his last latte that he makes.
Yeah.
It works out perfectly. It's
cool.
Perfect.
Was there ever a peyote trip, the one that's alluded to in the story?
Well, I'm 61 years old and I had my formative teenage years in the 1970s, so that should be your answer. There was a lot of So, but it never exactly. I didn't have So I have some experiences with psychedelics. Mm-hmm. It was not in a ritual setting. This was like knuckleheaded party kind of setting.
Exactly.
So I was informed by Carlos Castaneda. Mm. I mean, the character is Donnie. It couldn't be more clear that what I was trying to say. That's Don Juan from the Carlos Castaneda books. And that's not hidden. Everyone gets that one. There's some stuff that's hidden in the book that no one's gotten. And then, but I wanted the psychedelic aspect to be like how the painting came to be and what the importance of the painting was and what the importance of the tree was. I want to be very careful because there's like some real spoilers in this, but I wanted that to be as mystical as possible. And even the peyote, the peyote that he eats arrives in this magical way, where it like basically falls from the sky and lands on his truck. Mm-hmm. And, and he's with this, what the character people actually comment about and they say they loved the most was this character, Donnie, his friend from the Native American friend.
Interesting.
And everyone, I get that a lot. People said, I loved Donnie. I really thought he was such a great character. And if you really look into the story, there's almost nothing of him in the story. He's alluded to a few times. He shows up in kind of dream realms a few times, but he's not really in the story that much.
Mostly at the beginning, right?
Yes, exactly. And it's all through flashbacks.
Yes.
John's flashbacks. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
This is a very Castaneda cover too.
Oh, that was completely on purpose. Yeah. So, Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you know what? It was funny, that cover, if you see the little banner in the corner that says a paranormal thriller,
Yeah.
if you take that off, that little banner in the corner off, it looks like a Western thing.
Yeah,
It looks
exactly.
like Louis L'Amour.
Uh-huh.
Like, it looks like a, and it's like, oh no, it's not a Western in that sense,
Yes.
but it's a Western in a less traditional sense, a modern Western, I guess.
It feels good. I like the matte feeling. It feels
You know what? That's just, you have a little button to click when you self-publish on Amazon. You just can say matte or glossy, and I just push matte, and everyone says the same thing. Oh, I love the matte.
Yes.
And it's interesting if you get, like, if you eat potato chips and, like, while you're eating it and you get all oily fingertips, and you can wipe it off. I'm really like impressed with it. Like, what is this stuff made of? Like, how do they? So
that's great information for our household, actually. So
they can wipe off the matte colored books. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and potato chips and reading.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, have you I know you have heard some episodes of The Melt. Have you happened to hear any of the ones that I did with Hunter when she's talking about her Castaneda experiences?
No.
Okay. Perhaps that's a conversation you guys should get into sometime, or you can get into it right now. Do you want to introduce that aspect of things? Do you care to go into any of that right now?
I mean, I feel like we're interviewing Mike.
Oh, I get it. I talk all the time.
It's a conversation.
It's going great. So
it's a conversation. Yeah. We're all exchanging stuff here. So yeah.
I'm more interested in talking about my labs and what your thoughts on my labs are, because I'm very fascinated with what you were mentioning when you were talking about the mythology around UFOs and contact experiences. And I think that a lot of people sublimate those images that we have that are so ubiquitous in films into what they would perceive as an experience that may not be otherworldly necessarily, that could be have maybe some more human origin. So I'm really curious about that. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
So the MyLab thing is within the UFO lore. I've heard a lot of people tell some stories about MyLabs, really, really compelling stories. And first person, like, it's not through a book and stuff like that. And really talking with it. Oftentimes, like, it's mostly women. And wow, does it, like, the hanky comes out. Like, there's, like, it's emotional. It's rough stuff. And so the implication is that some faction of the secret government is in collaboration with these beings, seemingly, or that, well, there's definitely, like, there'll be people in military uniforms walking down the hallway of the flying saucer. At the same time, there's giant reptiles walking down the hallway of the saucer, kind of thing. So there's, like, an implication. I trust the people who tell the stories. The purging of emotions wouldn't be there if it wasn't there. No one could fake that kind of emotional trauma. This is the problem. This is the problem with this research. A believable person tells you an unbelievable story. I am right there when the person is telling the story. I am very, very, very empathic in the sense that I feel their story, and I just get swept along in their story. Afterwards, I'm like, wow, could that be true? Like, so something is going on where these stories aren't being shared by accident. So something is going on with these accounts. And so here, I'll tell one story. I don't want to use anyone's name. Person told me some stuff, and she said, what about to my lab experiences? And then there's basically a big burly military guy in a uniform and a gun kind of in the bedroom with her, and her husband is asleep next to her and she can't wake the husband up. And if I'm telling this correctly, the person kind of goes, you want to see something? The military guy, watch this. And then he whooshed, morphs into a giant reptile, whooshed, morphs back to a guy in a military uniform. And I've heard those stories from other people too, where it's like, I've been at a party and the person next to me morphed into a gray alien and then morphed back. And, like, so there's that kind of thing happens where you hear these weird stories where, and that's just this unbelievable story is being told by very credible, believable people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
What's at play here? It's perfect for an X-Files episode. I can wrap my mind around the logic of it. There was someone claimed a MyLab experience in their home, and the next morning there was like a little, like just a little plastic box was left in the living room. They remembered something happened in the living room, and there was like a little plastic box that they didn't leave there, and it was like the kind of thing you would get at like an ambulance driver would use,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
like some little box that would hold like some. And it was like they didn't leave it there. And they had the event the last night. They get up in the morning and there's like a little normal. This wasn't alien. This is not alien hardware. This is like straight out of some
Yep.
medical, first responder, out of their satchel. So I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, but so there's these whiffs of smoke here that in many cases lead back to something. But again, I'm lost. And I was trying to in the book tap into that kind of blurry overlap between this mysterious stuff, whether it's remote viewing or flying saucers or psychic spies, and whether it's a government agency or a non-governmental agency. I left that very, very blurry.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because the curiosity for me is, are these experiences that result in some psychic ability, is that a military experiment that they're testing on people to see if they can create psychic ability? Or is this some alien or otherworldly energy that is then imbued in that person after they have that experience? Or is it both? So I think that's the amazing part about, I'm really just compelled by that story of the mathematician, because I think of that and I think, well, what are the chances that this person ended up with you in an inn in New
God,
England? There is some synchro mysticism there where you're saying, okay, what's at play here? Like, what layer of the onion are we in when those kind of overlaps happen?
It almost seems orchestrated.
Oh, it's synchronicity is too small a word. It's bigger. It's like it's orchestrated. That's the term I use a lot. I use that term so much to the point where I have to be careful because I overuse it. But that was when you're in the midst of that. And so I've been at the receiving end of a lot of powerful synchronicities. Like I've written 3 books on synchronicities. Well, 4 if you can count the unseen. So I feel like I've got like people. I don't want to name drop here, but Diana, this people have told me this secondhand. They say, when the subject of synchronicity comes up, do you know Diana? I know Diana Pasulka pretty well. It's like Diana Pasulka says, she's talking about Mike Clelland. He's the guy that has the most synchronicities. And I'm like from Michigan. I'm sort of humble and like, well, I'm just like maybe, but don't you dare make a fuss about me. Kind of thing. But I will say that there is a feeling. There's a feeling in the room when I said, "You're the guy that went under the cube in Wyoming, or the big bright rectangle." I can't remember exactly what I said. I said the big rectangle, and he looked at me like, "Whoa, blah, 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 blah." You could just see this guy, this like totally together mathematician, kind of going, "What?" And there's a feeling in the room, and that was what I tried to imbue the story with. And I don't know whether I succeeded or not, but I mean, you just listen to the story, but that kind of like, holy shit, like what is going on moment. Could this be real? Is this really happening? I tried to make that palpable to the reader.
Well, to connect with where Chris was leading the conversation with Carlos Castaneda, what I find curious about Castaneda's work and my relationship with Castaneda and my relationship with his work is that if you look at the timeline of kind of what was going on when he was writing his books, there was a very intentional push in academia to start projects and programs and to utilize these different areas of academia to do experiments on people. So I think there's a level of Castaneda's work where you could look at it and say, this is all true. This is what happened. Don Juan existed. These are real events. And then there's another aspect of that where you could look at that and say, okay, so this entity or this energy that we call the government came in and funded these programs, and Castaneda was maybe a participant, but he didn't necessarily know that his research was being funded by the CIA. So he goes and thinks that he's having these mystical experiences in Mexico when he could be in a lab in UCLA on peyote. So I think that's the thing that's so fascinating about this, is that for all intents and purposes, his experiences are real for him, but there could be this other nefarious force that's coming in, that's creating these environments or orchestrating these specific circumstances, and then sitting back and just observing how people respond. So if you look at his work, he's created a psychedelic movement, just like Timothy Leary did, and created this mysticism around shamanism and around seers and around this very ancient knowledge that he claimed to tap into. So I just love this because I think, okay, well, what is my lab? What is real experience? What is government? What is all of the, like, it can be all of the above could be the truth.
I had the chance to talk to John Alexander when I was doing research on the second book, and I had a story, an owl and UFO story, from a guy. This is chapter 17 in the book Stories from the Messengers. Guy had a very mystical experience hunting.
Mm.
He was hunting for a deer. He made a bet with his brother that he could go to the old farm and bag a deer in a half hour. And his brother says, it's not like that anymore. So he climbs a tree and waits. And then there's nothing there. And then all of a sudden he sees something, that's glowing dot out on the horizon, kind of bobbing. He's coming closer and closer, and he realizes it's a bird. And he gets really close, and it's an owl. And this owl flies right up to him in the tree, looks him right in the eye, then turns and goes down the trail. And then I can hear the roosters up there. And then he goes down the trail, and he and it lines up, like, basically follows this owl, and then there's a deer right in line on the trail, and the deer's totally looking sideways, and he wrote this beautiful letter. I just put his entire letter. I've never done that before. Just put his entire letter right in the book. And he said the deer was standing sideways as if to say, shoot me. So he shot the deer, and the deer runs off in the woods, and he says, like, I knew enough not to chase the deer, because then you just let the deer go off and die, and then you go find it. And then he said he actually fell asleep in the tree, and then climbed down, and then saw where the deer was, and then walked in where he thought it went when it was shot, and they couldn't find the deer. He's walking around, couldn't find the deer. And then this squirrel comes up to him and looks him right in the eye and goes, chatter, 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 chatter. And then the squirrel runs away. And the squirrel stops and looks behind. Like, how stupid can you be? And so he follows the squirrel, and the squirrel takes him right to the dead deer. And it was at a spot he had actually walked by, but the deer was in a little hollow. And then he looks up. The deer is there, and the deer's right next to a tree. And he looks up in the tree, and at the branch looking down at him is the white owl that he had seen. So he has this mystical event. And then he goes through a very elaborate, so this was at a time in his life when he was immersed in remote viewing. He was doing it as a hobby, he was meditating and doing remote viewing, and there's these exercises that were he was very cautious. He didn't want me to use the word mentor, but he was working with Joe McMoneagle. And I contacted Joe McMoneagle and said, "Do you know this guy, Joe? His name is Joe, or yeah, Don. This guy Don. Do you remember this guy Don?" And he had and so Joe says, "Oh, I remember. Yeah. I said, "Can I use the word mentor in the story?" I said, "Sure, go ahead and use the mentor." Great. So I contacted him. It just Joe says it's okay. So I used the word mentor. So he was being mentored by Joe McMoneagle, like remote viewer number one. That's how he's listed in the literature. Like he's the number one guy, remote viewer number one in the Army's, the military's remote viewing program from the early 1970s. And so he was immersing, and he was having all these mystical experiences like this. And I talked to John Alexander, who's retired from the military, but is still a voice out there doing research into UFOs as well as into the mystical. So I said, does this go hand in hand, this like remote viewing and the mystical experience? And he said, yeah, we certainly recognize that as an effect that happens when you immerse yourself with that level of meditation and focus into these other realms, that you will have these mystical experiences. And that was very much what I'm finding with people who I'm immersing myself in this owl research. That's my question, why owls? And I'm having these mystical events where I say to the guy, "You're the guy with the one under the cube," and so there's this overlap, yeah, with this. I think it's just anyone does a very focused intention on anything.
Yes.
I think you'll get it. So someone, an author, I think anyone writing a book, even if it's on something deadly dull, I mean, that's not what I would say, even if it doesn't have anything to do with mysticism or psychic awareness or anything or paranormal, I think that their intention, they will have synchronicities that will, I think that's just how reality is.
Yeah, because it's like there's this field, the morphogenic field that you're tapping into, and when you go into that space in meditation and you're a writer, for example, then it almost feels like those characters are born in that space. And that you are bringing life to them, because the more energy you have to focus in that space, the more energy you can give those characters. So it's almost like you've gone into this other realm, and John may be not real in this realm, but in the realm that you wrote him, he very much is real and exists as Katie, as all these characters do.
They felt so. I just talked to Whitley Strieber recently just about the book, and I said, when you write, did you fall in love with do you fall in love with your characters? Like that's why I didn't want to write a villain, because I got so much emotional investment in these characters.
Yes.
And that took me totally by surprise.
That I found that very. Now that you mention it, I didn't really think about it when I was listening to the book, but I have a hard time with a lot of, say, television and media in general these days, because there seems to be this big uptick of anti-heroes or complicated characters where, they may be in the position of the protagonist, but they maybe have a very dark history or something like that. So it's like you can't completely, or I have a hard time completely committing to investing emotionally in this character, because, just like, I don't know. Let's just wait and see how it pans out, judging on this person's past. But it was refreshing in your book, because I think I genuinely liked everybody. I don't remember disliking anybody in the book. I mean, to some degree, there was some I was maybe a little standoffish about, like the foreman, for instance. But even him, yeah.
I wrote him, and I still don't know whether he was a good guy or a bad guy.
But I like that. I love that. I mean, I think for me, it's important to be able to relate to at least one person, even if they're a secondary character in a book or a movie or a TV show or something like that. So they can be sort of a reference point. But if everybody's a asshole or, conniving or two-faced, it's like, why do I care? Why should I care about these people?
That wasn't totally intentional. And I just didn't want to, I had to invest my own life into it. The book took me 14 years to write, if you like. So there's like 9 years in the middle there where I wasn't doing anything. So I was like, I really realized when I was going to write this, I didn't want to be in a negative cloud.
Yeah, for sure.
So the protagonist, if he has a crisis in a way in the beginning, his crisis is, which I certainly understood doing illustration work professionally and such, was that he lost his inspirational spark. He just talked about, I'm doing these paintings. He's an artist. He has gallery openings. The story starts at a gallery opening. He's kind of like not into it. He just feels like he's been doing the same painting over and over again.
Yeah.
And that was the crisis, which is any creative type will understand that. And so that was his kind of, and I've suffered terribly from depression, and I didn't want to make him seem like clinically depressed, but I did want to make him anguished that his creative spark was gone.
Yeah, I felt that for sure. At one point, maybe you didn't, this is a side note that doesn't have anything to do with the book. On Facebook, maybe a few months ago, you reported that you had just stumbled upon a folder of emails or something that you totally forgot was there or something, and they were full of owl reports, owl and synchronicity and UFO reports.
1,200.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Are you please tell me you're gonna do a third owl book?
Well, so this I'll do. This has got visual aids. So here's my visual aid. Okay, so here's the 3 owl books, and this is fun. I'm going to move the little screen and just be able to see myself here. Oops, sorry, I just did the wrong thing here. I'll do it like this. Okay, there we go. So here's the 3 owl books. This is the first one. This is 2015 got published. This one got published in 2017, and this one got published in 2019. So 3 books on UFOs and owls. This is the 4th one. That doesn't count. This is the nonfiction one. You stack them up, right? Here we go. 1,000 pages, almost to the button.
Wow.
1,000 pages. If people say, hey, you can write another owl book? And I'm like, if I can't make my point in 1,000 pages, it's like not going to do me any good to write more stuff where I got so many stories. I got so many people say, do you have enough stories? I'm like, I could write 500 books with the number of stories I have. It'd be the same story over and over again. It'd be the same story over and over again.
I would find something.
I got to figure out. So there's I could do an owls and shamanism book. I could do an owls and death book. I could do an owls and pop culture book, but those are all chapters in the other stories. And I read the chapters like, I kind of said it pretty well in that chapter. I don't know, so that was the sort of challenge, because there's certainly owls in the unseen in the fiction book, but it's, here I'm doing the thing where now once I'm on the screen, I look at myself and say, there, I'm going to close them off. So there you are. I really was trying to, so in essence, you said, are you going to do another book? And what I did is the fiction book. And I'm kind of working on book 2. There's this book, everyone says, are you going to finish this book? It's totally ended on a cliffhanger. What'd you do that for? And I was like, oh. So I'm working on, the book's been out for over a year, and I've only made notes on ideas for the second book, but I will probably do that hopefully in the upcoming year. We'll get hard to work on that. The mistake I made in the first book is I didn't have a good clean outline before I started. I just kind of started writing, and wow, that was a mistake in retrospect, because I had to backpedal and clean up stuff at the beginning of the book. I talked about that a little bit, where you change one thing at the end of the book, and you got to change 5 other places in the story.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Did you have anything? Okay. So you have recently restarted doing your podcast, right? What brought you to want to do that again?
I got all these friends in the field, and I'm like, oh, I got to talk with them. And it's kind of one thing. It's like, do I just call Joshua Cutchin on the phone and just bend his ear? I was like, no, I'll invite him on a podcast. And there's people that are interesting, and I feel like I did a podcast are you familiar with my earlier incarnation of Hidden Experience?
Yes.
I did it through. If you listen to those shows, oh my God, I sound like I'm like the patient on the therapist's couch. I'm like a mess. It's not hidden. I'm an emotional. That was at a chapter of my life where I was struggling.
Yeah. You're trying to sort it out.
I was in that moment where, like, basically where I was in the throes of the synchronistic madness.
Exactly.
And I've calmed down greatly. And I stopped doing the podcast when I started writing the first Messengers book. And I was just like, I just put all my energies into one thing. I'm not very good at dividing my time. So I started up the podcast. It just felt like it was time to do it again. And I wanted to do a really clean. That's why I asked you before we started, do you edit? Because I edit heavily on my thing. And I was like, I like the editing process, and mostly so I can take out my long-winded, like, gobbledygook sometimes. It's really nice to sort of self-censor myself.
That's all I do is take out bits of myself, really. But
me too. Very little. If a guest goes or has an awkward pause, I'll clean that up a little bit. But I edit myself heavily.
Yes.
And it's been so. It was a decade, a full decade of no Hidden Experience podcast, and I brought it back, and it was. And one of the things I have no interest in doing a show with a weekly schedule. So I was like, 1 or 2 a month, and then I'll be happy with that. Yeah. So that's where I'm at right now.
Cool.
But it was mostly just because, like, I got a lot of friends in this field. It'd be nice to talk to some.
Exactly. I'm so glad to have it back. I was going through the back catalog a couple of years ago, so I'm looking forward to having new ones to listen to now. And you were on Streeper's YouTube channel.
I did a podcast for Whitley Strieber for 3 years, and that was tough because I was in the throes of writing the book. The show on Whitley Strieber's site, which is easily to find, and I think most of them you don't have to be a member. You can just click on the show and just dig through the archives and find them.
Yes.
It's called The Unseen. It was started in 2018-19. I think it was at the very end of 2018. I think my first show was in 2019, in the winter of 2019, in January, February. And it's called The Unseen, and I had to pick a name. And I got online and I was like, the paranormal checklist, or, something, like a title for a paranormal show. I was like, I wrote down a whole bunch of really good names. All of them were taken. All of them were taken. Like, there's so many podcasts out there, paranormal podcasts. I was like, oh, good grief.
Yes.
So I was like, I got this book that I'll never finish. I'll never finish this book, The Unseen. It was just hidden away, and I kind of tinker with it every now and again, but it was basically dormant. And oh God, they're really loud. And the show is called The Unseen, and I just picked, that's a good name, and I was like, great, I'll use The Unseen as the name for the podcast. And never did I imagine I would finish the book. So
I'm glad that you did.
I am too.
Fantastic.
I'm really proud of the fact that I'm proud that I persevered and didn't give up.
Yeah.
That was 99% of book writing.
Oh, absolutely. I have never done that myself, but I can only imagine. It's 99% of many things, many artistic endeavors, for sure.
How do you know when you were done? What was the moment where you felt like you could call it?
Well, I had I know an astrologer who said, "Oh, you should publish on this date." And I gave it the date. Oh, it's way out there. That's way out there. I have no problem with that. And I was like, all of a sudden the date's coming. I'm like, okay, I got to edit it like this thing. And there was this point when I was like, I think all the typos are out. At the very, very, very end, it was just like cleaning the typos out. And I did the workaday stuff where I would run it through. There's like typo finding applications and platforms and stuff like that. I ran it through that, and I caught a bunch of grievous stuff that was really stupid. And there's a couple of funny ones made it through the first printing, but I feel very confident saying that there are no typos in this book. So
I didn't see any.
Tough.
Yeah.
Well, you were listening to it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. What am I talking about?
Actually, there's a couple points where the guy Jay did it. the guy Jay, like when I tried to read the book aloud, I tried to read it as I wanted to do it in my own voice.
Mm.
Oh man, did that not it was not working. I couldn't do it. Like I had to act other people's voices and
Oh,
I had to
yeah,
like do
yeah.
the pauses
Uh-huh.
and I edit so heavily that I would just like, it felt like I read every sentence 10 times.
Yeah, I could see
And I would
that.
pick the best sentence and I would pick the beginning of this sentence and the end of
Oh,
that
yeah.
sentence. And I was like, oh, but I said this word in the middle and and it was like making myself crazy
It would
to
take
do
forever.
a 350-page book like that. And then and this guy did a beautiful job, but he snuck some stuff in there. There's like normal stuff where he would read something. I was like, I never said that. And I would go through and look at the book and his words and like, oh, he just made that up.
You're
It's just like,
kidding me.
it was like two little points where there was one point where he said, like, oh, I think it was I said, oh, and it was behind the motel. And then he said, oh, it was a few feet behind the motel. And I was like,
What?
I never said a few feet. And it was just, that's normal. He did a great job. That just made me laugh. And it didn't change anything in the story.
Sure.
So it's in there in the audiobook and it's invisible, but it's like, I didn't write it, but it's like that's like a little bit of that came through and I caught it. And I was able to work with him and he corrected a few things. Most of it was just like the tone of
Mhm.
a very few things I had him reread.
Mhm.
Yeah. So there was just a little funny. It's like, oh, it seems a little like it should be a little more mysterious in this point.
Mhm.
So it was literally like 3 words here and 4 words there. I just had him change. So.
Gotcha. I was always curious as to if the author had any say in how their book is read.
Well, this is self-published and normally they don't. Like if you're working through a publisher, the author is divorced from the whole thing unless they read the book themselves,
Sure.
which I tried and I failed miserably at it. But and he said, like basically said, can I talk with you? He's like, really? Like I do books all the time. The author never talks to me. Like, sure, let's talk. And so we had this long conversation. And I remember saying, like, we were doing a video call like this, and this guy Jay is a super nice guy. He lives in Brooklyn, and he was in his studio, so he had the microphone there, and he's in the room with the foam walls and stuff. And I said, I really worked hard to make. I didn't put many big words in. I tried to write in short sentences and short paragraphs and, to really simplify it. And when I said that, you could just see him going, like, oh, what's it be like? Like, I think he's done some books with some long paragraphs and some long words. And so,
but from a story perspective, how did you know when you were done?
Oh, well, I knew the very ending. Before and I won't give anything away. Like the very ending is like I had that written right from the start.
Mm-hmm.
So the very beginning was done and the very ending was done,
Gotcha.
and then I had to fill everything in the middle. I worked with some people who were reading it. The Joshua Cutchin gave me some great feedback, and so people read it, and so it felt like the way I say it is like the clay. Like you make a sculpture in clay. And there's a point when it's all lumpy, your fingertips are all over it, but you want to smooth all that out. You want to add a little extra, you push a little more clay in, you smooth it out. So I was in the act of just smoothing it out. Like, oh, a little shorter sentence here, oh, a redundant word there. And they're just, all of a sudden it was like, I don't think I can, like, I feel like I could go through right now and find a word here and a word there and continue to clean it up. But there just came a point when it was like that day, May 16th, 2023, was the day it got published, the day I pushed it. And it was like 11:30 at night. Let me tell you, I was like, I milked it right to the very end. Most of that was formatting the cover and things like that. There's like which I did the layout and the interior layout of the book. So that I did they did the interior layout of the ebook. I did the cover. I wrote all the stuff on the back.
Mm-hmm.
And I drew the cover, yeah. So it was like there was a clock ticking. It was really good to have a deadline because I could have stretched it for another 5 years. I bet if I didn't have the formality of a deadline.
Yeah, I think it was very tastefully done. I see some self-published books, and for some reason they'll have like a weird font, like Helvetica or something. And it's like, this looks horrible. This looks.
You just keep going. You're making me feel great.
So I pay attention to details like that. So I think that it was really very, very tastefully done.
And that was my goal. So I laid out Joshua Cutchin's, the last few of Joshua Cutchin's books. There's a woman named Robin Lassiter. I did the layout for her book. And and I say to them, my goal is, I want you to hold this book in your hand, and I don't want you to know it was a self-published book. I know just what you're saying. That makes me crazy. You go to a UFO conference or and everyone's got these self-published books, and they're like, "Oh, that looks like a self-published book."
Yeah.
And I wanted it to feel like it came off a top-shelf publisher's press, and that clean art directors had solved all the visual issues. And
mission accomplished.
Was not by accident. Thank you. That really fills my heart.
Yeah.
Can I read a little something? I have a segment that
Please do.
Okay. So this is, let me gotta open it here. Where we go. There we go. So now you're totally disappeared. So I wrote a section, and then after I wrote it, I realized this was 100% about the writing process. This takes place somewhat near the end of the book. There's like a kind of a thriller mystery here, and you probably won't understand exactly what's going on, but you'll sense the tone of the book here. So the two main characters, John and the love interest, and they're talking alone out in the desert. And the love interest is working with the spies. And there's stuff she knows that John doesn't know, and there's stuff John knows that she doesn't know, and they're kind of they get to the point where it's like he finally asks. He said, I asked, do you talk about this with your team, what it all might mean? She said, no, not like this. We talk around it, about little parts of it. I pressed her. What is it? What does it all mean? I don't know, but I know what I feel. She spoke with so much emotion, I thought she might start crying. I said, what do you know that I don't? I'm not sure, but I can say this. My team is lost, and they have no idea of what to make of you or of me. And I don't want any of your I don't know shit, because you know a lot more than they do. That shut me up. She looked indignant and said, nobody here has asked you, but I'm asking you now, how did you get to the bottom of that canyon? She stood steady and waited for an answer, and I could tell she didn't want some play-by-play of me turning left at a big landmark or squirming down some narrow drainage. She was asking something else. I studied her beautiful green eyes and said, I let go. I let go of caring. I let go of my old life. I didn't care if I died. I let go of everything. She asked, and how do you feel now? Alive. I spat that word out. I was angry. I was mad at everything that stood between me and a deeper truth. We were connected to something. We were swimming in it. There was a powerful knowing all around us. There was a powerful knowing all around us, yet I couldn't tap into it. Neither of us could, not fully, but it was there, leading us on, guiding us. So you could see how that would fit into a kind of thriller story like that. But when I wrote it and reread it later, I was like, oh, that was me. That's me talking about like writing, like that whole thing. Like I gave up. I didn't care. Like I just gave up. I like abandoned myself to the process. And it felt so good.
Yeah.
It felt like such a good creative, like that's what, like the beginning of the story is John loses his creative spark. And here I was doing illustration work all my life. And then I'm like, well, I'm going to write a book. And it turned into like a creative act. And I really, it felt so good.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, really, really incredible book. Anybody listening or watching, I highly, highly recommend it. And also, yes, there we go.
Oh, there. Thank you. I'm going to hire you as my publicity department.
And also Mike's other 3 books. And you have other books too on completely different subjects like,
ultralight camping and building igloos and stuff like
that.
Yeah. I love it.
Which you also do the illustrations for, right?
They're a little different than the cover, yeah. But I worked as a professional cartoonist for a long time so like go to a family reunion or go to like something and like, oh, what do you do for work? And I'm like, well, I'm a cartoonist and I write UFO books. And like, let me tell you, like I'm the crazy uncle at the family reunion for that kind of.
I would be leaning, if I wasn't already directly involved in that conversation, I would definitely be leaning into eavesdropping into it. I would probably insert myself.
It doesn't go as good as you think it would. Let me tell you, because I've, so.
Well, they're funny daddies. What do they know? Where would you prefer people to get your books?
Amazon is fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much the only place you can get it self-published through Amazon.
Gotcha.
I guess you could get it through the iTunes store or something like that. But yeah, Amazon is just as easy as anything. So
Fantastic.
And the audiobook is available through Audible or Amazon. And I'm going to again praise the guy who read the book.
Mhm.
It really turned out when I had the conversation with him, I basically said I try to put a humanity into the story, and that's my request is you capture that humanity. And I really think he did a good job at that.
He did. He did. Absolutely. When I see that the author does not read their own book, I'm like, because, sometimes you get it's this sterile sort of film strip narrator voice that some people read other people's books in. And this guy does not do that at all. His voices really add to it too. And yeah, he did a great job.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. So yes, I highly suggest any of Mike's books. And where can people find you and your work online?
You can Google UFO owls and I'll come right up, and they're easy to find me that way.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to MikeClelland.com. That's kind of the central hub, and that'll take you to the podcast and to my blog and to the books and to I have some art portfolio type or illustration portfolio sites and things like that too. So all of those are linked there, and there's contact information and so once again, I'll say, people out there, if you've had weird experiences with an owl, I'm not even concerned about the UFO stuff anymore. That's not important to me anymore. The owl is more important than the UFO stuff. So if you had a weird owl experience, I want to hear about it, please. I may not get back to you in a timely fashion, but please know that I read every letter, and that the power of those letters is, I would have dropped this a decade ago if there wasn't something there. And I am just as on fire now as I was when I first stumbled onto this mystery.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and chat with us. It's been fantastic. And
it's been a joy. This has been great.
Yeah. Yeah. And we should definitely do it again sometime. I want to reread the owl books. It seems like it's been years since I've done that. And I had the not atypical experience, but when I had an ebook version of the first owl book, The Messengers. And as soon as I started reading it, within the first maybe paragraph, owls were not common where I was living at the time. And an owl, of course, hooted. Like, oh my God.
I gotta be really careful. So I laughed because
you've heard it.
You and everyone else.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to put into words how normal that is.
Yeah.
For me. It's shockingly normal.
Yeah.
If I could, that's the book I could do, is just people who've heard owls or seen owls, while reading my books and stuff. I have a great story from I was about to do a podcast, and the podcast host his name is Juan, and the show is called Juan on Juan. It's a great episode. Uh-huh. And so he has a little son. I think his son is little, 7 or something. So he's in the backyard with his wife and his son. It's the night before the show, and he knows he's going to be interviewing me the next day, and he's looking up at the trees and stuff like that. He goes, I'm going to be interviewing the owl guy tomorrow. And his little son goes, Dad, look. And a floating orange orb floats through the yard. So he was looking for an owl, and he saw a UFO.
Wow.
And it is that's perfect. That is so perfect as far as how the research has been reflected back at me.
Yes.
I feel like I'm putting, I don't understand. I'm putting some weird intention into the work, and it's getting reflected back at me in this palpable, visceral way, exactly as you explained.
Yeah, it's amazing.
In that first paragraph of the Messengers.
Yes, I love it. And now we live in some place where owls are very frequently heard. So I find that very comforting.
I hear them every night. Every night I hear them out my window.
Yeah.
I'm in a place with a lot of owls, so there's no mystery. All the neighbors are hearing them too, so there's nothing special about it. But wow, is it magical?
Yes, absolutely. All right, Mike. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I will let you know when this comes out, and you can spread it around however you see fit.
This was a great interview. This was great. Yep.
Likewise.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed it. You can kick it off.
I look like I just wandered out of the woods.
No, you don't. Wow. The woods have treated you fantastic, girl.
Lord, wow.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. I don't know. I just caught a glimpse of myself from the wrong angle, I guess.
Well,
That was awesome.
It was very, very cool. I was glad to have an excuse to have Mike on again, because the two Owl books and the Hidden Experience book are incredible, fantastic. I have always been a fan of owls and, of course, UFOs and paranormal experiences. So those two books that he did on owls were right down my alley. Exactly what the doctor ordered. I highly suggest you read them.
Well, it sounds like we're getting them in the mail,
Yes. Woohoo!
which is super cool.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. I realized that you don't have a whole lot to say because you
No, I
didn't read the book.
and then I felt like I was in trouble. I was
Why?
just like, oh God, okay, now I haven't done my homework, and I'm being called out in front of the whole class, and I want just the ground to absorb me.
No, nobody was calling you out.
No, I felt, I've been in university for 3 years, and so I'm in the, like, you have to do your homework, and you have homework, and you have to study, and
Yeah.
so he's such an interesting person. I felt like a little humbled by the fact that I had not read his book, because now I was like, wow, I really want to read this book.
Yeah, it's a quick read. It's really, really good. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I immediately responded to the cover, and I'll show it again because it's super cool.
Yeah, it's
I
beautiful.
immediately responded to this cover because it did remind me of Castaneda, and there's just something very, very specific about doing this type of a image, because it does kind of harken back to Louis L'Amour. But
Oh, yeah.
there's also something very beautiful about it, because it's like that with a twist. And I responded to Westworld in a similar way initially, but it's such a dark show and such a dark subject matter that it kind of freaked me out that they were blending like the modern world with like the old West world. But this seems like, just from his descriptions of the characters, this doesn't seem like this is a dark tale that's going to take you down scary caverns. This sounds more like this specific book is more, has more mysticism.
Yeah.
And so that interests me, that it has like, it's folding layers in on themselves that aren't normally folded together.
Yeah. I think sometimes stories, movies, TV shows about sci-fi or paranormal or a mixture of all the above can sometimes try to fit too much into a small space. And this has a lot of breathing room in it. And I respond more to personal relationships between the characters, people, conversations. Like, I get into that more than like big, huge conspiracies by government agencies. And, sometimes the story can be too big. And if there's not real human beings in there somewhere to relate to, I can only get into it so much. But this is all about human beings, and all about connections. And it's really, really sweet and mysterious and sometimes dark, but not ever in a way that's like bleak or anything like that. Just more like, wow, what's going to happen next? What the hell was that?
Well, kind of the common thing that I have noted in any maybe left of center conspiracy realm arenas or podcasts or books or films or any of it, is that it always casts like these agents of chaos as being like kind of negative or nefarious players in the story. And I'm not saying I'm not saying that like everyone in the government's great. No, of course not. That's obviously not true. But even people that are involved in these special projects that are, you know, maybe working with remote viewing or working with psychic ability or kinesthesiology or anything that is considered like something that is of an occult nature. I think that there are people in those spaces that do work for the government that aren't bad actors, that are decent people that want to propel humanity forward. You know, so there's dueling forces. There are people who want the slave reality that it seems like we're being pushed into, and then I think there are other people who want to see what humans are capable of, like what are the capacities that we have, and how do we push those capacities to the limit, to their limits. So I don't always necessarily think my lab negative, bad, rapey, or whatever. I think like, okay, well, what if it's not that? What if that's just one aspect of that? And what if there are people who are doing these experiments, these psychic experiments, or using UFO technology or owls or any of the stuff that we're talking about, but they're using those things for the good?
Yeah. I think that
Sorry.
that's okay.
So sorry.
I think that sometimes the truth movement or whatever you want to call them, get so caught up into their own hysterical narrative that they lose track of the fact that, just as you said, and Emily has said it too in her own way, that there are probably more good, or at the very least neutral, people involved in these programs than we would like to admit, or some would like to admit. I want to think that myself. And even with the most nefarious program or campaign or whatever that is being instituted, I think more than we might guess, a lot of those are set into motion because somebody thinks it's a good idea and that it's actually being done for a positive reason. That may be however misguided it may be, or however I'm kind of losing my thought here, but I just think that there's more of that than we may suspect. There's more humanity involved.
I think that the issue that we've seen with MK Ultra or any projects is that the ethics of doing experiments on people is very cloudy, and it's not very clear what is ethical and what's not ethical, because you're talking about manipulating energies or manipulating people or DNA or whatever you're working with. So I think it's easy to go into the fear porn aspect of conspiracy and see it all as being negative or dark, because negative and dark is very sexy to some people, and that sells tickets.
Yeah.
But I think the other aspect that to me is more of the curiosity is the people that go into these spaces that are scientists. Like, not everyone's Fauci. Not everyone is doing experiments on beagles. There are people who are doing things that are doing experiments with humans, and the intention is completely different. So I think that that's the thing that we have to look at is what is the intended result, and what is the intention of the person who is conducting that experiment. Like, are they really trying to do something positive, or are they doing something negative? So that can be folded into writing. I don't think that Mike Clelland is going into these spaces that he's writing in with nefarious or negative intentions. I think he has a curiosity about something, and the universe, if we want to use that kind of woo-woo terminology, is responding in kind. So he gets thousands of letters because he puts something out there that he's curious about, that is actually of good intent. He's not saying go out and harm anybody. He's like, have you had these experiences? Like, let me know. And I'm in your same camp. I don't read fiction. It's not my thing. I'm far more interested in reading like about science or things that are being explored. So to see someone that has taken a subject matter that could be looked at just from the paranormal and kind of fictionalize that or folded in real life experiences into a fictionalized piece of work, I think is amazing. And it's probably super, super interesting. So this may be my entree to reading fiction again.
Josh Cutchin, as we said, has a fiction book out. Tracy Twyman wrote fiction. So, yeah, I think I need to, this is helping me to reassess maybe these authors that I have come to love and really respect for their nonfiction work, to look into their, because it's not like they're going to start writing something that is, I don't know, about fantasy football or anything like that.
Right. But it's also a way that you can explore ideas that you have, maybe you don't necessarily have like evidence-based data on,
Yes.
but you can explore those ideas in a fictional context and people will be maybe more receptive to that.
And Chris Knowles, now that I'm remembering, even wrote a fiction book too. So, yeah, I could see that. I mean, we were just talking about screenwriting earlier today and creating worlds out of nothing. I mean, I definitely see the appeal to that. I think I'm just usually drawn to things that, like, to me, life is so fascinating, and I enjoy hearing about how people live their lives, the experiences that they've had, and their ideas about how the world and the universe works, that there's so much of that I'm not going to be able to even take as much of that in as I would like, much less things that people just make up.
Yeah.
I usually save that for movies, I guess.
But the cool thing is that, like with the cube and the mathematician, that's a great example. That's a great example of some infinite organizing power that is clicking these puzzle pieces together, because that is furthering the story of Mike Clelland's life. So to me, I think where I get very nervous about fiction is that I see these realities as being real. So we could call it fiction, but depending on how deeply you're fleshing out these characters and these worlds actually do really exist in some multiverse. All of these people truly exist because he has the energy to create those people. And so I think that's the thing where you have to kind of protect your inner sanctum and your inner world, because you don't want to create a lot of negative energy and a lot of it's like you're manifesting something maybe out of some seed of thought that could be not a good thing to manifest.
Yeah.
Let's just say.
Exactly. I look at these AI generated images and animations. I follow a lot of those people that create those on Instagram, and a lot of them are not all of them, but the majority of them seem to be sort of on the nightmarish side.
Yeah.
Like, why not create something that's beautiful? Like, I mean, it does happen, and maybe I just don't know. I mean, I don't know everybody on Instagram who puts that stuff out, but a lot of it seems to be on the dark side. I mean, and David Lynch's movies.
Yeah. I do send you, there's like a few artists who do create these realms that I send you sometimes of really beautiful worlds. So I know it's possible. And I think, again, if we're talking about entities and AI, I think that they're like, when I see this morphogenic field, this field of possibility, I see it with like millions and millions of little seeds, and whatever thought you put is actually watering one of those seeds. So when you put a thought out into that field, you are either creating a utopia or a dystopia or a hell realm or a magical being realm. So I think it's really important that we're very honorable when we go into those spaces, because there are things lying dormant waiting for a thought and waiting for the right alchemy or the right person to think that right thought so that that thing can manifest. And I don't know what any of this has to do with Mike's book, but I'm really excited to read it.
These gibberings after are usually started off by the guest or something that they brought up or something that came up or something that it reminded us of. So it doesn't have to be all about Mike's book. But this all stemmed from Mike and Mike's book.
Yeah.
Yes. Which led us into speculating about fiction versus nonfiction, utopias versus dystopia. It's all connected in some way or another.
It is, for sure.
On that note, unless you have anything else, okay.
That's all I got.
Thank you all for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed Mike's third appearance on The Melt. I would suggest I probably will put the links to the other episodes in the episode notes, because those are doozies too. If you're into owls and mysterious things, those are definitely things you should look into. I mean, really, it's the stories that he told are just really the tip of the iceberg. It's really amazing and outstanding stuff. I would easily read 3 more, 4 more, 5 more books of that. But I understand what he's saying. But I still want to read 3 or 5 or 4 or 5 more books of that stuff because I love it. It's fantastic food for the imagination, and just to know how mysterious and unexplainable some aspects of our realm are. Thank you all so much for listening. I strongly suggest you check out Mike and Mike's work and his podcast that he resurrected. And if you have to go to the bathroom, if you have any guest suggestions, praise, blame, whatever, the Melt Podcast at protonmail.com or
hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening. Please keep listening. Great stuff headed your way.
You got it.
Much love.